Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Ari, and hopefully you'll stick around for a short video. Guys, I apologize if you hear any noise in the background. It is an incredibly windy day, so the wind is kind of smacking up against the window, so at times there's a little bit of rattle. But anyway, about today's video. In today's video, I want to talk about transitioning later in life. You know, we see a lot about transition now, more in the media than before. And it seems like it can be a no-win situation. When you listen to the critics, if you transition in your teens or earlier, then you hear that you're too young to really understand this, or you're too young to make those type of life-altering decisions. If you transition later in life, again, they meet you with criticism of, if you were always this way, why didn't you say anything when you were a kid? Or if you'd really been trans, we would have seen something when you were younger. Or you've made it this far in life as a man or a woman. Why can't you just finish out life that way? There are so many things to where you feel like you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. Now, honestly, for the vast majority of these critics, I don't believe that time frame is really what they're concerned with. I don't think that it's about when you transition or how you transition. These are usually people who would just prefer that you not transition, or that trans people in general just didn't exist at all. But in the off chance that you are someone who's watching the video and you're a little bit confused as to why someone would transition later in life or how that works, I wanted to try my best to answer some of those questions. I actually started my transition at age 34. Now, I know that doesn't make me an old transition, but it definitely did add a layer of complication, because when you've lived 34 years a particular way, then it's hard for people to break their preconceived notions that they've built up around kind of who you are. So it can complicate things. The questions / comments I'm going to talk about in the video are ones that I've either been asked personally, that I've asked myself over the years, or that I've seen in online forums. Okay, so point number one. You weren't this way as a kid, so how can you say you were born this way? Well, first, I think it's important to note that just because you weren't aware of it didn't mean it wasn't going on. And I don't mean that to be an insult to anyone who maybe didn't notice it. We all develop our sense of self and our sense of identity at different points. And even as we're developing that, a lot of times developing the language or the method to communicate that can take even longer for some people. So I'm thrilled that there are people who feel that they're able to come out so much earlier and not lose that time in their life. But for a lot of us, the language wasn't there to communicate it to the people in our lives at the time. I was raised in a time and place where even the concept of transgender wasn't known to me, or to the best of my knowledge, to my parents. I knew that things were different. I knew that I didn't feel I fit in. I felt out of place. But I didn't have the language skills to communicate what that meant. And unfortunately, by the time I started to develop to where I did understand what it meant, I had already gotten that subtle societal signal that being this way wasn't going to be seen as acceptable. So one of the first things you tend to learn at that point is denial and concealment. Number two, so why now? So there really isn't a simple answer to that question. Ask trans people and you'll get as many different answers as people you ask. For me, myself, I had a number of reasons. There wasn't just one. There were so many that started to pile up. First was the fact that I was getting older. I'd always told myself, you know, someday I'll take that opportunity and I'll really be myself. But then it starts to become, when is that someday? One of the things that I don't talk a lot about, but that I've had major issue with, is around when I turned 34, I noticed thinning of the hair at the corners. And that may not sound like a big deal to some people, but that was incredibly upsetting and traumatic for me. I felt like that opportunity that I kept talking about for the future, that my future was being stolen from me by the effects of testosterone, by what it was doing to my body. It was stealing my opportunity to be comfortable in my own skin. I was just seeing my dream, my someday, my future circle the drain. I'm almost 8 months on hormone replacement therapy now, and it was only recently that I actually noticed that some of the hair, thank God, that I had saw thin was starting to come in new. I started to notice those baby hairs. And the reason it took me 8 months to notice is because it was so extreme that I would wash my hair and part it to cover the sides before I looked in the mirror. Because I knew if I looked in the mirror and if I saw it, I was going to end up being reduced to tears. I was going to end up spending the rest of the day probably in bed trying to sleep it off until I felt better. And that was just one of those effects that was damaging my ability to be who I was. I was petrified that I was going to wake up an old person who had never ever had the opportunity, who had never actually been their true self. That was my nightmare, that I would wake up that way old, that I would die and I would have never been myself. I wasn't what you would call suicidal per se, but I was to that point where I was really praying that God would either give me the strength to actually step out and be myself, or just take me. I couldn't handle one more day living the way I was. Another big part of the why now, was that I was tired of feeling like a liar with every single person I talked to. 5 years ago, I lost the most important person in my life. And I lost them without ever taking an opportunity to be honest with them about who I was, what I was feeling. This was a person I confided everything in. And that's an opportunity I can't get back. I was bound and determined that I wasn't going to repeat the same mistake with the people in my life that I love. I'd already done that once. I couldn't do it again. And then my number 3 point, you've lived this long as a man or as a woman. Why can't you just finish and live out that way? Well, the simple answer is that I wasn't living at all. I was boxing myself in without the opportunity to really live. You know, when you come out, gay, lesbian, bi, trans, you take a risk of losing people in your life, of losing family, of losing friends. That's not a risk that most of us take lightly. I know I didn't. But the reason that we go ahead with it anyway is because being honest about who we are puts the possibility that we might lose people in play. But not being honest about who we are makes that not a possibility, but a guarantee. That's how I felt, at least. I felt like I would lose everyone if I wasn't honest, because I was already losing myself. Okay guys, that was today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. You know, the point of this is that at the end of the day, there is no such thing as the right or wrong time to transition. You have to decide that for yourself. You have to be comfortable in who you are. And we all reach those points to where the hiding becomes too much. Only you can make the decision when it's time to come out, if it's time to come out. when to transition, how to transition, if to transition. These are all decisions that you have to make. Don't be guilt-tripped. Don't be convinced that because you didn't transition when you were younger, then somehow you're not trans enough. You always deserve the right, the privilege to be you, no matter what point that is. In closing, my quote from Kesha, don't let the bastards get you down. Be proud of who you are and hold your head up high. Until the next video, I'll see you again. I love you guys. Bye-bye. Don't let the bastards get you down. Be yourself. Hold your head up high. And just enjoy your life while you're here. Everything, yeah, that was negative. You know, be proud of who you are. Hold your head up high. Life can be short, and that sucked too. Try this again.